The Trooper is possibly one of the greatest songs Iron Maiden have ever written.
Alexander the Great.
Okay, if not the greatest one, then definitely one of the most popular ones.
Yes, that's true.
And since I thought that an episode about song fighting Russians would be extremely appropriate for Ukrainian today, let's first of all take a look at the origins and the actual meaning in that song, reveal some of the hidden secrets of the Trooper artwork, and then discuss why this song is so relevant today in 2022, even more so than it was in 1983. Here you go. Very quick before we start, I just wanted to ask you to not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, and especially if you disagree with me, because the whole point of the Up the Iron series is of course to start a conversation. But alright, let's do it. Written by Iron Maiden's founder Steve Harris in 1983, The Trooper is of course based on the Charge of the Light Brigade, which took place at the Battle of Balaclava in 1854 during the Crimean War. And yes, that's why I thought that it would be appropriate for me to record this episode, since I basically did it in between the air sirens. During the last almost 40 years since the song has been released, much has been said and written about the Charge of the Light Brigade and its relation to the Trooper. And of course, even more has been said about how the main galloping guitar riff is meant to represent the war's gallop with which the brave soldiers were charging forward. And so I actually do not intend to go into the details of the historical events of that time in this video, especially since I personally believe that even though The Trooper is based on those, it is actually inspired not by historical events per se, but much more by the Lord Tennyson's poem The Light of the Charge Brigade. And even though it talks about war, it is actually anti-war in its meaning.
Flashed all their sabers bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered.
After falsely interpreting in order to regain the weaponry from the Russians, the Light Brigade started the charge against the positions of the Russians, which were much better equipped and in fact were much more numerous than them, doing something they were not supposed to do. And yet none of more than 600 men, and by the way we'll talk about that number in just a minute, has turned back, even though each and every one of them of course understood that they were riding to a certain death. So just imagine that for a second, more than 600 young men who are willing to undisputably die for their country without questioning the command because they simply believe in what they're fighting for. Just imagine how much good they could have done for their country if that energy was channeled in a proper way. And yet when some of those reached the Russians, all they lasted for was Russian blood, with some of the survivors remembering that at that point they had neither fear nor pity. And I guess even though they still looked human on the outside, on the inside they looked very much like Eddie. So yes, of course it is an anti-war song. The Trooper Eddie is definitely the most iconic Eddie there is, and very possibly will be at this point. The main protagonist is of course the Trooper Eddie, dressed in the red British uniform with the saber and the British flag in his hand. By the way, it is the very first time in which Eddie is a direct follow-up of himself from a previous album cover, as we can see the head clip on his head since the guy just underwent lobotomy a month ago. By the way, I promise to not be a complete nerd about that, but still, Light Brigade in the 19th century would most likely be wearing a blue uniform and not the red one like the one Eddie is wearing. And by the way, the 17th Lancers, who were in the avant-garde of that brigade, were also known as the Death or Glory Boys and had an absolutely heavy metal badge. It's all the same. Death or glory. But anyways, the red British uniform is of course way more recognizable, and it is the one which Bruce Dickinson is wearing on almost all of the shows whenever they are performing this song. And actually, according to Derek Riggs, the red color is partially why Iron Maiden fans love the Trooper Eddie so much, since it clearly stands out among all other artworks, for Derek didn't really like to use red in his paintings too much. On the bottom near Eddie's right foot we can see Derek Riggs' signature, and right next to him we can of course see the Grim Reaper. By the way, for some weird reason many people on the internet keep saying that this is the very first time the Grim Reaper appears, when in reality the first time Derek Riggs included him was on Twilight Zone single artwork. Right beneath the Reaper we can see a hand of a presumably dead soldier in a rather unnatural position. We spoke about that in one of the previous episodes of our Up the Iron series, but that hand is actually a reference to the movie The Creature of the Black Lagoon, one of the favorite Derek Riggs movies of all time. And that same hand is also featured in Somewhere in Time artwork. By the way, many fans have noticed that the Eddie's pose and overall this picture is very much resembling of an illustration which can be found on one of the Confederate flags, yet Derek Riggs himself never either confirmed nor confronted this theory which has been circulating around the internet. On his right shoulder we can see Eddie's number, for which Iron Maiden of course received a lot of criticism once again, to which after the release of their previous album they were very much used to.
I thought it was a good album, you know, strong album, but that's about it.
And yet, just like the number of the beast is much more of a storytelling song, the number on Eddie's shoulder might actually be not a religious reference, but much more a historical one. According to Lord Tennyson's poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, there were only 607 troopers who were taking part in that charge.
All in the Valley of Death rode the 600.
And yet Alfred Tennyson wrote that poem after the first reports he read in the Times, when the later accounts claimed that the total number of troopers there was 673. Yet as historians started to get more access to information, they were able to make even more precise calculations, taking into account those who fell sick on an eve of battle. As counting 658 combatants, plus 6 non-regiment officers, and 1 assistant surgeon, Henry Wilkin, making it 665 altogether.
You know, unbelievable.
And yet, according to eyewitnesses, there was one more trooper who got so drunk on an eve of battle that he was imprisoned the day before and thus was not able to leave with everybody else. That guy, John Vay, later on escaped the prison, took a horse and joined their comrades for a battle, and because he was late to the party, he was not wearing a proper uniform and did not even have a saber, and was using a butcher's axe instead. And thus, even though it's a theory, of course it could be that Eddie could actually represent that one soldier who was not supposed to even be on that battlefield, yet the horrors of war have turned him into a monster we see on that cover, especially since we know for sure that Iron Maiden are very familiar with that theory. Musically, The Trooper is a masterpiece. Iron Maiden's trademark gallops, guitar harmonies, and exquisite vocals make it one of the greatest heavy metal songs ever written. And of course it is the main reason why it is so popular today, almost 40 years after its release. And yet, there is one more. The Charge of the Light Brigade is one of the saddest stories in the history of the British Army. For it tells the story not only of courage and love for your country, but also of more than 400 lost lives. And even though deaths happen, and especially during the war, for example during the Crimean War more than 20,000 people have died, those 400 plus deaths were absolutely unnecessary.
Honor the charge they made. Honor the Light Brigade. Noble 600.
It was mostly those deaths which darkened the day of victory for Britain and allies after Russia was defeated during that war. In fact, it was partially because of the Charge of the Light Brigade that the major changes in the British military structure and their approach to wars overall were made after the victory in the Crimean War. And this, I believe, is why The Trooper is so relevant for us today, because it reminds us once again that just like that Crimean War in the 19th century, our fight today is not really only the fight between the two countries, it is the fight between the two different worlds with two absolutely different system of values. Because for us and for our system of values, deaths on the war, even though they're necessary, each and every one of them is an absolute tragedy. Thus, even if one of them was in vain, we will take it upon our leaders. When for our opponents, human life means absolutely nothing, and all their rulers and actually their people, unfortunately, care about is achieving the goals they set in front of themselves. Anyways, what do you guys personally think about The Trooper? Is it one of the greatest heavy metal songs, and is it the best Iron Maiden song the band has ever written, or an overpumped old tune? Please let us know in the comments. I'm very curious to find out. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for sticking with me through these times, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!